Hello, world from Guatemala. Uh, I am sort of on top of a mountain. I've been walking up it for a long time, anyways, and kind of realized at a certain point, a very appropriate metaphor, that I don't think this particular mountain really has a top. I kept looking up and being like, I'm almost there, I'm almost there. Oh, it's so steep to keep going, but that achievement mindset, right? It's hard to get rid of. But I can almost see the top. I must get there. I must get there. Why? I don't know. Um, they kept going. They kept going. And at a certain point, it became apparent that I think it kind of just starts to gradually level out and then it just keeps going. And it goes through to the other side. And it just struck me what an appropriate metaphor this was. Yeah, so just as I've been walking, um, been listening to the Cranberries. They reissued MTV Unplugged, classic album. No Need to Argue, MTV Unplugged from the 90s or something. Just recently, I guess, was reissued. And oh, I grew up listening to that. Um, the lead singer, who is super hot, her last name is very close to the first name that I was given by my guides not long ago. Pronounced differently, but yeah, and I just, found out that I got into school in Ireland and just really am feeling that ancestral reconnection, but also there's lots of complicated things about this journey. So, um, it's the land that my dad's side of the family is primarily from, and yeah, I don't really talk to them, and I also feel yeah, I feel like part of why we're all here and part of the ultimate karma of, kind of a liberation path is to do the healing for our ancestors that they couldn't do. Um, yeah, so I just was thinking a lot as I was walking about fathers and sons and children, sons in a broad metaphorical sense, and sons in a literal sense. So we've also right now still got this massive pile up of all the personal planets are under the beams of the sun, which means they're within 15 degrees of the sun. And according to ancient astrologers, that basically meant that anytime a planet was within 15 degrees of the sun, it was compromised. It was kind of getting eclipsed. It was like that planets are not able to express themselves fully when they're that close to the sun because it's fucking bright. uh, the sun, also represents the father archetype. And we all kind of grow up under the shadow of our fathers in a way, right? Whether or not we know who they are, whether or not we have a relationship with them. It's in our blood, it's in our DNA. And I do believe it's part of our karma to eventually kind of help heal the wounds and the damage that our fathers and their lineages have caused. And, our mothers by being complicit. And I hate that I'm using that language because, yeah, none of this shit was ever meant to be gendered, anyways. The people who raised us, let's just say that, who did the best they could because really humans are meant to live in community, I believe. And I think we're all just meant to help each other. And that, yeah, I mean, if you look at, so, hunter-gatherer societies and pre-industrial societies, they didn't used to have this concept of father lines at all. They didn't have a concept of patrilineality because Nobody knew who anyone's fucking dad was. They didn't have pregnancy tests, paternity tests. I don't know why I said pregnancy tests. They didn't have paternity tests back, before capitalism, and with everyone living communally and sharing things that are of value, which include oxytocin, which include pleasure. Um, Venus words here. There was no need. There was no need to know who anyone's father was. Um, because the children were raised by everybody, you know? Dad was whoever like was around to, I don't know, help provide resources, help provide discipline. I shouldn't even say dad, the parents were just whoever was there to provide nurturance, moon, and structure, Saturn, resources, Jupiter, and identity, Sun, to help identity within the context of the group, Sun. So we live in a sun-centered culture in capitalism. We decided at some point that the sun was fucking everything. Probably because dudes started, we decided there was such a thing called dudes. We started being able to tell whose children were whose when we started living separately, when we developed agriculture, and all of a sudden there were different houses. We stopped moving around. We stopped sharing everything in common. And once there was a my house and a your house, and we didn't all live in the same house, and all of a sudden we knew who people's kids were, which meant now they are my children. Now they're not the children of the village. Well, there wasn't even a village. Now they're not the children of the group. Now there's a village. Now there's my house. And these are my kids, and these are your kids. And, you know, as these concepts of private property kind of calcified, solidified, crystallized into something hard and rotten, then the ownership mindset it extended to people too. My kids, my wife, my house. And once there's boundaries like that, then there's competition. And once we're producing outside our means, we're outstripping the natural resources of the universe. Like agriculture was the first time that humans were able to produce more than the land could support. And that meant that now people were a lot more subject to the scarcities of a certain place, right? You weren't going to just, if you're not going to just get up and move when the resources are depleting somewhere, then fear comes in, then hoarding comes in, then all of a sudden you need to stockpile to get through the winter, right? Instead of just going somewhere else where it was already more abundant. Anyways, that's like a whole other conversation. But so these are the patriarchal mindsets that then, end up kind of, making for kings, making for sovereigns, making for we're scared, someone tell us what to do, that turn spiritualities from this kind of like pantheon of all the different gods that provide all the different things, just like all the different people in the community provide different things to the raising of the children. um as above so below, as within so without, and our interpretations of the cosmos and the gods and the spiritual forces are reflecting the way our societies are unfolding, right? And that in turn is reflecting our psyches because we internalize our environments. This is kind of like spiral dynamics theory, Ken Wilber, integral, blah, 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 academic bullshit to put on top of things. But it is a helpful framework, I think. If you want kind of like diagrams and charts. I don't know. I like visuals sometimes. So if you look up like Ken Wilber integral theory, there's some good like charts that you can follow on like the different stages of human development that like mirror the different stages of like societal development. I shouldn't say development either because I don't like that word. Change. The idea is that it's evolving towards something ultimately better and that we break out on the other side eventually, kind of like back to where we started. It's very Aquarian, actually. So Wilbur goes through these color phases, right? That kind of say that we like evolve to different levels. And that's that within tier one is sort of like, 3D Earth stuff. And once we get to a certain point where we sort of like quote unquote evolve with our like technodelic resources, because each different stage corresponds to like a different type of thinking. So there's like spiritual development, again, bad word, spiritual change, evolution. Evolution just means change. Spiritual evolution, uh, economic evolution, political evolution, ecological evolution. And then it's kind of like once you've gone through all these phases and you like bring them all together and then you like emerge into tier two, which is like technodelic, ecotopia, Aquarian age stuff. So I hope that we can do that. And if not, then I think we collapse and we start at the beginning again. I mean, either way, we collapse and start at the beginning again. But if you follow the spiral dynamics theory, it feels like we're right back at the beginning, but it's a spiral, right? So we are going up, even though we're also like going backwards. You know what I mean? So that was not where I thought this conversation was going to go. That was not where I was intending to go. I was intending to go mythological. So let's see if I can get us back there. Um, so I was thinking about the pileup of planets that are traveling together, all the personal planets under the beams of the sun, moving around the zodiac, more or less together, which is kind of rare because, the orbital cycles of these planets are different. And it is like not often that they're all like rolling together. So it's a very interesting chance to think about. Like, I think it is really inviting us to look at like what our relationship to the sun has been and our like dependence on the sun has been and our like outsourcing of all our fucking power to the sun has been. Because we're scared, because we forgot that like society is all of us and that we have all of these archetypes inside of us already. So, and that we need different things to be healthy, and we get different things from different archetypes within and without. Uh, so I've been thinking about Mercury a lot because, well, right now, Mercury just entered yesterday and is kind of in this process. It's unfolding over a period of time, but Mercury has a synodic cycle like Venus does. So these are the two planets. They're also the two most trans planets for this reason. They have orbital cycles that are like irregular. They don't just like go in circles, right? They go in kind of these patterns. Like I don't know it well enough off the top of my head to explain it, but their orbital cycles are like irregular and elliptical, and as a result, they they have these synodic cycles. They like change directions, and they're very trans. They're very trickstery, and they change their speed. And maybe that's the main key, is that they change their speed and they don't. Anyways, I don't want to get it wrong. But at a certain point, they change phase in the sky, and they have two different phases to the point where like ancient astrologers thought that they were actually two different planets. They have morning star phase and evening star phase. And evening star is when they appear in the sky after the sun sets, and morning star is when they rise in the sky before the sun rises. I think. I hope. I think that's right. Makes sense. Um, so, and they're very bright because they're close to us. Mercury and the sun are an interesting thing to consider because Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It never gets more than 28 degrees away. So Mercury actually never gets an entire zodiac sign away from the sun because the zodiac sign is 30 degrees. So it gets close, but I don't know what I'm saying. They get close, but they never quite escape the sun. Like Mercury is always kind of like in the shadow of the father, right? Um, and I think that's part of where Mercury gets this like trickster archetype from, because a lot of like the mythology around the father is sort of like having to deceive them. And I think that is because of this patriarchal legacy. Like, I wonder what it was like in the very beginning. There've always been trickster spirits in nature. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go further with that, but uh essentially like was kind of thinking about my relationship with my father and like dads that I wish that I had, and people who have been like dads to me who have died recently, and the friends I had growing up, and like the ways we supported each other with the things we weren't getting from our parents. And like kids need to be validated for who they are, right? And they need like their cleverness affirmed. They need their intellect affirmed. Um, but like not too much, right? Like they also need to be kind of kept in line because just people need to be kept in line because like we can't get too full of ourselves and too proud of our own little tricks. But also like I think we're supposed to have fun and we have to kind of know when to go in through the side doors. And like this is especially true for those of us who have been othered by patriarchal culture and have had to develop like tricksterism as a way of life because we are living in systems that were not meant to support us. And like to be honest, I really think this is everyone because capitalism is a carceral framework that it puts everyone in prison. Like nobody's actually happy with this arrangement. This was a revelation I had the other day that was like even the sun hates this. Like nobody's winning here. I think I said this the other day. But anyways, so I have so it's called a cazimi when a planet and the sun align directly. And both Mercury and Venus go through their cycles. They speed up, they slow down. And for part of their cycle, they're in front of the sun in the zodiac. And for the other part, they're behind the sun. And at a certain point, they cross, right? And that point where they cross is called the cazimi. That's where they're exact conjunct. I think I might have talked about this the other day, but this is an interesting moment. And like technically a cazimi is when they're basically like directly on top of each other, but I think the influence extends like when they're within like a couple degrees. And right now, Mercury and Mars and Venus, I think, are all cazimi. I don't want to look because I don't know if it's going to stop the video, but um, basically all the personal planets are like within 3 degrees of the sun right now, which is really interesting. It's like all the facets of the child, the self, are kind of like getting eclipsed in a sense by the sun. But then I was thinking about the mythology and was like, actually, if you go back to like the Greek mythology of like Zeus and Jupiter and Hermes and all of that, like a bunch of different archetypes kind of got rolled into what we now regard as the sun. And it's like Jupiter, Zeus, Apollo, like all of these things at some point like got consumed by the sun, I think, as society became more patriarchal. But like the ancient Greeks and people, I shouldn't even say Greeks because like ethnicity is like a freaking colonial invention anyways. The ancient peoples of the Mediterranean like saw many different aspects, many different archetypes that like maybe they were all related to the sun, but they were not the same thing. So one face of the sun was Apollo, um, and Mercury is the child of Zeus, Jupiter, another face of the sun. Zeus and Jupiter, I don't know if you would even consider them the same. I think of like Jupiter as the abundance, the resourcing. Jupiter is nature, the nature needs the sun. Plants can't grow without it. Zeus is like the thunderbolt wielder, kind of the channeler. I think almost like the one who is the intermediary maybe between like the wild nature god of Jupiter and like the human realm. And Apollo is the healer, right? And the god of, music and inspiration. And so I see kind of almost both like Zeus and Apollo as sort of like emissaries of Jupiter. I think of Jupiter as like, I mean, I love Jupiter because I have a lot of Jupiter in my chart, but like I think he is kind of the original like wild god, and people used to go worship Dionysus, which is a Jupiter archetype, like in precursor to Jesus, and that's a whole other story. But they'd worship him by like having ecstatic ceremonies and orgies and like just wild rituals in the forest. Kind of again, these just the group getting together and giving each other a bunch of shit that like everyone needs and the whole system needs. The system needs catharsis and release. The system needs pleasure and joy. And, the system needs to process these things collectively or it all bottles up and it explodes. Anyways, tangent. So, Mercury, Hermes, was the child of Zeus, Jupiter. I'm not really sure how the names relate here. But uh, Hermes basically popped out of the womb and was instantly like, cool, I'm here to play some tricks. I'm going to fuck some shit up. And saw Apollo's herd of cattle and was like, I'm going to steal me some of these cattle. Wouldn't this be like a fun trick to play on Apollo? I don't really know why. But anyways, he stole a bunch of Apollo's cattle and pulled off this trick like so elaborately that like Apollo did catch him and kind of like took him to Zeus, Jupiter, whoever, and was like, yo, this happened. But it was like so expertly pulled off that Jupiter, Zeus did not punish Hermes. He rewarded him. He was like, well done. And made him like this psychopomp and this messenger. And Apollo, even, I feel like, was impressed. And Apollo they ended up like exchanging gifts with each other. So Hermes had like made the first lyre also, like while he was at it, they were at it. After stealing some cattle, like caught a turtle and made the first musical instrument, which was the lyre. And so Mercury and Apollo, I feel like I'm mixing up the Greek and Roman names. Hermes and Apollo like exchanged gifts and Hermes gave Apollo the lyre, and then Apollo like became the god of music, and Apollo gave Hermes the staff that we know of today with like the snakes on it, and made Hermes like the god of healing. And Hermes was made a psychopomp that could move between the worlds, the realms of maybe they always were. I'm not sure. But anyways, Hermes goes both ways and can move between the realms of God and human and is like the most shapeshifty trans of all the creatures. But all of them are kind of trans. Like, and I just mean like they change form and they don't have one form and they have many different faces and expressions that all kind of relate, but are all kind of different. And like, but Venus and Mercury, because they have these irregular cycles and they speed up and they slow down and they become morning star and they become evening star and they have these like totally different disguises, basically. It like allows them to move between the worlds. And I think that like the more sun-centered society got, it's like the more people have to rely on these disguises to hide and to keep themselves safe. But if you think of it from this kind of multifaceted archetype, it's like, so there's also a sort of belief in these ancient astrologies that's like being under the beams of the sun is bad. It eclipses the planet. It doesn't function properly, blah, blah, blah. But then when you get to the Cazimi, when you get right up next to the sun, when you slip right under Apollo's nose and you steal the cattle, that was actually considered fortunate or favorable. It was like in that moment, the planet's best qualities came forward. So it's like you're in detriment until you get right up to the sun. And then if you could pull that hoax off, like the sun rewards you. The sun's like, actually, great job. Like I didn't even see that coming. And then your natural gifts are allowed to come forward. So Hermes' ability to kind of like sneak through the lines and shapeshift then is rewarded with like, now you're the healer, because the healer has to move between the worlds, and that's like how you get the magic potions and solutions to help people. And like the healer has to be able to hide and sneak across enemy lines and go in through side doors. And I mean, this is Bugs Bunny. Like Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd has been a very present archetype lately. Like there's a reason that's such a part of popular culture as well. It's like, this kind of attraction, repulsion, like, you're frustrated with the thing until it just like does such a good job deceiving you that like you can't help but be delighted. And that's like what we should hope for from our fathers almost. Like, I don't know. And like Elmer Fudd is this representation of like the betrayal of society and like transphobia and all these things too, right? Because it's like, oh, there's actually that gets into like a whole discussion about Pluto and Venus, I think, and like the things we value and like the things that attract us the most. So that I feel like that's a separate discussion, but just I'll seed it for now that it's like I think there's something with Venus's synodic cycle and the morning star, evening star that's like, and Venus's interaction with Pluto right now, and like my natal Venus and transiting Pluto are now together forever for the rest of my life. So I guess I'll get to think about this a lot. Um, because Pluto will be in early degrees of Aquarius for the rest of my life. But yeah, like what we are kind of compelled most by what undoes us in a way. Because I think we need to be broken down periodically, right? Or else we get too much sun, or else we get too full of ourselves. Like we need to be eclipsed every once in a while, I think. Yeah, by these different parts of self. And if we have we need the dad that gives us borders and discipline, right? Because, like, what do I want to say about this? So, Jupiter, the different facets of the sun, the different facets of, the sun is archetype and the father is archetype, right? There's Jupiter, the abundance of nature, but we can't expand forever. Nature is abundant, but there's limits, right? There's environments are supposed to have limits. We're not supposed to just have limitless growth. And that's why agriculture and industrial, yes, nature is abundant, Jupiter, but like in respect to that abundance, like we used to, we need to realize that there are limits. Saturn's depth, Saturn's restrictions, Saturn's boundaries. Saturn is the one that comes in that says, like, yeah, nature is abundant, but like we can't fucking grow forever. Like, we gotta like recognize at a certain point it's time to move on. Like, leave this environment behind, leave this life behind, leave this whatever. Um, and we don't want that in capitalist society because I don't know, maybe it's because we collapsed all these archetypes, It's like we want to live forever, we want to grow forever. We forget that we are all these things and that we get to keep coming back. That's, I think, the part that we're missing is like we get to do it all, but not all at one time. And industrialized society collapsed that vision because instead of having our lives be sort of populated by this concept of multiplicity with the gods, with the people in our society, with whatever, with the environments we were moving between. Instead, it was like it's fixed and everything's here and everything's the one dad and everything's the one thing. That's just too much pressure. It's too much pressure for everyone. It's too much pressure for dad. It's too much pressure for the environment. It's too much pressure for the kids. It was never supposed to be like this. So we need the dad that reminds us that the world around us is abundant and invites us into communion. We need the dad that also like imposes the healthy discipline and limits so that we don't overdo it because Jupiter likes to overdo it. Um, and we need Apollo, who's going to like give us gifts and reward us for our cleverness. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's maybe one archetype I'm forgetting. Yeah, maybe it's Mars, maybe it's Venus. We got to realize when it's time to cut ties and when it's time to change our disguises. And yeah, Venus in the morning star archetype as the warrior, right? Like maybe that's kind of the ultimate realization. Maybe that's the tier two evolution of the sun. That's a fun idea. I'm gonna play with that one some more. Yeah, so I think those are my thoughts. Like I have a Mercury Cazimi in my chart, and so this was all sort of prompted as well by me just trying to feel into like why do I have such a hard time with Mercury? Ostensibly, I'm a writer. Ostensibly, I used to be a food and beverage writer. I love nature, I love abundance. I believe in justice. I'm philosophical. I'm very Jupiterian in many ways. But I've always had this sort of tension of feeling like I need to communicate these ideas to people, not because they're mine, but because they feel like they're coming from somewhere outside of me. And it feels like it's urgent that they need to be shared. But then to actually express those has been painful to the point of being almost impossible. I feel like I'm constantly learning and absorbing things and not retaining them. And there's something in Jupiter itself there's something inherent to this relationship between Hermes and Jupiter that is almost like an oversaturation principle. And I'm not really sure what it is, but I like this concept of not just feeling like the sun is my adversary, but like if I can get close enough and pull off a really good trick, then maybe we can help each other out. I don't know. I don't have a conclusion. I just thought it was all a really interesting exploration and thinking about going back to the fatherland and thinking about which is the motherland and thinking about going back to Ireland, a place where there's a lot of regional conflict and like the troubles are still very present, kind of listening to the Cranberries as they're talking about this. It's this like, why are we it's all because we just decided to pretend like there was mine and there was yours, that these things were separate and that any of us ever had claim to any of it exclusively anyways. The album is called No Need to Argue. And I think if we get back to the roots of things, I hope we can evolve past the place where we feel like we need to argue about everything and we feel like we need to divide everything up. I keep seeing butterflies on this walk up the mountain, which I just, by the way, have to say I think is Terence McKenna winking at me because he talked about the archaic revival, which is a sort of like spiral dynamics theme as well, I guess. That's like the idea that we can learn from the past. Okay, this is part of it. So this is part of it. I also recently learned that this video has gotten so long. I also recently learned that Mercury in Mercury's synodic cycle has different phases beyond evening star and morning star. Richard Tarnas, archetypal astrologer, um, divided it into, here we go, Promethean and Epimethean. Prometheus being the mythological character who stole fire from the gods, uh, and then was punished because at some point the gods became like vengeful creatures that didn't want humans to know things. Um, and Epimetheus, I hope I'm saying that right, being the brother of Prometheus, who was always kind of looking back at like his poor brother chained to the mountain, getting his liver eaten out by a vulture every day for the rest of eternity, because apparently that's what happens when you know too much. Either that or you get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You know, the patriarchal gods really don't like people knowing shit. Which is, again, this interesting contrast. Here we go, bringing it home somehow, between the original pantheonic version, right? That is like, let me reward you for your cleverness. Instead, this is like, let me punish you for wanting to know things. Like, it couldn't be more opposite. We need the dad that is delighted with our tricks, not that chains us to a fucking mountain and has a vulture eat our liver, not that kicks us out of the garden and calls us a whore. Like, that's patriarchal bullshit. Um, so yeah, Mercury has these different phases, and there's Promethean, direct and retrograde, because as we know, like Mercury famously, uh, at various points throughout the year, more off all planets have retrogrades, but Mercury has them the most often, and that's why they get talked about the most. It's like the point at which the planet appears to move backwards in the sky, but it doesn't actually. Um, Yeah, and so then there's also Epimethean direct and Epimethean retrograde. And depending on when you were born, you fall into one of these different types. And this was fascinating to me to learn about. And then also, like, you know, as within, so without, our society is going to be in different Mercury phase at a certain point as well. So I found out that I am Epimethean retrograde, which means looking back on the past and analyzing the fuck out of it to try to learn how to build a better future, which is me. It's very appropriate. And every aspect has its shadow side, and I think for me, it's like getting lost in the past part and not moving towards the future enough. And then part of like, I think Promethean Direct, I think, is the one that's more future oriented. That's very like Age of Aquarius, and like our shadow with that is so fixated on this like amazing technodelic future utopia that we're not actually like being realistic about how to get there or learning from our mistakes. So we need something in the middle of these, and I think that's, yeah, kind of what people like Terence McKenna were trying to get at. Though I think he tended towards the utopian maybe a bit too much. Yeah, just can we learn from where we've been and take what's helpful and leave the rest and move towards tier two and delight and cleverness. Can those of us who have the trans shape shifting skills that I think are needed to move into this new phase, can we use those gifts? Can we share those as needed? And can we form our own resilient networks, you know, so that we can avoid just replicating the same thing we had before? Because I'm seeing a lot of that in my travels, and it's really starting to bother me. So, anyways, wow, every time I'm going to do something short, it turns into like an even longer than before transmission. Uh-oh. Got some weird skin spots. Anyways, yeah, I hope everyone has a good day, and I will talk to you again soon.